On February 22nd, 2022, you addressed your country in a nationwide address when the conflict in Ukraine started. And you said that you were acting because you had come to the conclusion that the United States, through NATO, might initiate a, quote, surprise attack on our country. And to American ears, that sounds paranoid. Tell us why you believe the United States might strike Russia out of the blue.
Are we having a talk show or a serious conversation?
Here's the quote. Thank you.
Are you ready for some tough questions?
You're going to be fair.
I'm going to be fair.
Just be fair.
But you're okay with some tough questions?
No, I'm not.
You're not okay with tough questions?
I want him to be fair. You don't ask Biden tough questions. So. I think we have enough of an interview here, Hope. Okay, that's enough. Let's go.
Vin la tine la emisiune,
Păi da, spuneți-mi
mă
voi.
deranjez la ora 10 noaptea și îmi spui tu mie că habar n-am eu.
Păi da, spuneți-
Ia să hai tu habar, vezi cu cine mai faci tu emisiune, da?
Но поскольку у вас базовое образование...
Because your basic education is in history, as far as I understand.
Yes.
Тогда я позволю себе...
So if you don't mind, I will take only 30 seconds or 1 minute to give you a short reference to history for giving you a little historical background.
Please. I beg your pardon, can you tell us what period? I'm losing track of where in history we are.
After the World War II, Ukraine received, in addition to the lands that had belonged to Poland before the war, part of the lands that had previously belonged to Hungary and Romania. So Romania and Hungary had some of their lands taken away and given to the Soviet Ukraine, and they still remain part of Ukraine. So in this sense, we have every reason to affirm that Ukraine is an artificial state that was shaped at Stalin's will.
Have you told Viktor Orban that he can have part of Ukraine?
Никогда не говорил.
Never. I have never told him, not a single time.
У нас с ним даже на этот счет...
Well, that is, and there's a lot of that, though. I think many nations, they're upset about Transylvania as well, as you obviously know. But many nations feel frustrated by the redrawn borders of the wars of the 20th century and wars going back 1,000 years, the ones that you mentioned. But the fact is that you didn't make this case in public until 2 years ago, February. And in the case that you made, which I read today,
Сейчас скажу.
you explain at great length that you felt a physical threat from the West in NATO, including potentially a nuclear threat, and that's what got you to move. Is that a fair characterization of what you said?
Я понимаю, что мои длинные диалоги, они...
I understand that my long speeches probably fall outside of the genre of the interview. Bear with me, please. We're coming to the point where the Soviet Ukraine was established. I said to him, I asked him,
Если бы Россия поставила вопрос о вступлении в НАТО,
Bill, do you think if Russia asked to join NATO, do you think it would happen?
он сказал, ты знаешь, это интересно.
Suddenly he said, you know, it's interesting. I think so.
Уже на
But
ужин
in the evening, when we met for dinner, he said, you know, I've talked to my team. No, it's not possible now.
можете спросить у него. Но я-
Would you have joined NATO?
Послушайте,
Look, I asked the question, is it possible or not? And the answer I got was no. If I was insincere in my desire to find out what the leadership position was,
But if he had said yes, would you have joined NATO?
если бы он
if he had said yes, the process of rapprochement would have commenced, and eventually it might have happened if we had seen some sincere wish on the other side of our partners. The US leadership exerts pressure, and all NATO members obediently vote,
голосуют. Даже если им
even
чего-то
if they do
нравится.
not like something.
Я скажу в этой связи, что
I had a very serious conversation with President Bush and his team.
чтобы
I proposed that the United States, Russia, and Europe jointly create a missile defense system that, we believe,
которое, как мы считаем,
if created unilaterally, threatens our security, despite the fact that the United States officially said that it was being created against missile threats from Iran.
угроз со стороны.
That was the justification for the deployment of the missile defense system.
So twice you've described US presidents making decisions and then being undercut by their agency heads. So it sounds like you're describing a system that's not run by the people who were elected in your telling.
That's right.
Конечно,
That's
в
right.
итоге нас послали подальше. Я не буду...
In the end, they just told us to get lost. But our proposal was declined. That's a
Тогда,
fact.
именно тогда я сказал,
It was right then when I said, look, but then we will be forced to take countermeasures.
будем создавать такие
We will
удары.
create such strike systems that will certainly overcome missile defense systems.
Был так.
And we created hypersonic systems with intercontinental range, and we continue to develop them. We are now ahead of everyone, the United States and the other countries, in terms of the development of hypersonic strike systems, and we are improving them every day. Well, we were promised no NATO to the east, not an inch to the east, as we were told. And then what?
Ну,
They said, well, it's not enshrined on paper, so we'll expand.
5 расширений.
They have come to the Ukraine ultimately. As the Americans requested, Yanukovych did use neither the armed forces nor the police, yet the armed opposition committed a coup in Kiev.
Провела госперификацию наша.
With the backing of whom?
При поддержке ЦРУ, конечно.
With the backing of CIA, of course.
Которые, как я понимаю,
The organization you wanted to join back in the day, as I understand.
хотя это серьезно.
We should thank God they didn't let you in.
В 2008
So,
году
in 2008, the doors of NATO were opened for Ukraine. In 2014, there was a coup. They started persecuting those who did not accept the coup, and it was indeed a coup. They created a threat to Crimea, which we had to take under our protection. They launched the war in Donbass in 2014 with the use of aircraft and artillery against civilians. This is when it all started. There is a video of aircraft attacking Donetsk from above. They launched a large-scale military operation, then another one. When they failed, they started to prepare the next one.
That was 8 years before the current conflict started. So what was the trigger for you? What was the moment where you decided you had to do this?
Спровоцировал конфликт изначально.
Initially, it was the coup in Ukraine that provoked the conflict. CIA did its job to complete the coup.
Один из замов
I
госсекретаря.
think one of the deputy secretaries of state said that it cost a large sum of money, almost 5 billion. It was they who started the war in 2014. Our goal is to stop this
Мы не
war,
начинали ее.
and we did not start this war in 2022. This is an attempt to stop it.
Do you think you've stopped it now? I mean, have you achieved your aims?
No, we haven't achieved our aims yet, because one of them is denazification. This means the prohibition of all kinds of neo-Nazi movements. This is one of the problems that we discussed during the negotiation process, which ended in Istanbul early this year.
Как говорят некоторые
After gaining independence, Ukraine began to search, as some Western analysts say, its identity.
во главу угла этой идентичности.
And it came up with nothing better than to build this identity upon some false heroes who collaborated with Hitler.
Которые сотрудничали с Гитлером. Их имена кричат.
These were people who exterminated Poles, Jews, and Russians.
Это люди, которые уничтожали поляков, евреев. Надо.
It is necessary to stop this practice and prevent the dissemination of this concept.
Они занимались.
The SS troops consisted of Ukrainian nationalists who did this dirty work. You say Hitler has been dead for so many years,
Люди, которые
80 years.
уничтожали
But his
евреев,
example lives on.
поляков, живы.
People who exterminated Jews, Russians, and Poles are alive.
Сегодняшней Украины
And the
аплодирует
president,
ему
the
в
current
канадском
president of
парламенте,
today's Ukraine,
аплодирует
applauds him
стоя.
in the Canadian parliament. We have to get rid of those people who maintain this concept and support this practice and try to preserve it. That is what denazification is.
How do you eliminate a culture or an ideology or feelings or a view of history in a country that you don't control? What do you do about that?
А вот знаете, как вам не покажется странным, в ходе переговоров в Стамбуле
You know, as strange as it may seem to you, during the negotiations in Istanbul, we did agree that we have it all in writing. Neo-Nazism would not be cultivated in Ukraine, including that it would be prohibited at the legislative level. Moreover, the president of Ukraine has legislated a ban on negotiating with Russia. He signed a decree forbidding everyone to negotiate with Russia. But how are we going to negotiate if he forbade himself and everyone to do this?
When was the last time you spoke to Joe Biden?
I cannot remember when I talked to him. I do not remember. We can look it up.
You don't remember?
No. Why? Do I have to remember everything? I have my own things to do. We have domestic political affairs.
Well, he's funding the war that you're fighting, so I would think that would be memorable.
Ну да, он финансирует.
Well, yes, he funds, but I talked to him before the special military operation, of course. And I said to him then, by the way, I will not go into details, I never do, but I said to him then, I believe that you are making a huge mistake of historic proportions by supporting everything that is happening there, in Ukraine, by pushing Russia away. I told him repeatedly, by the way. I think that would be correct if I stop here.
This could devolve or evolve into something that brings the entire world into conflict and could initiate a nuclear launch. And so why don't you just call Biden and say, let's work this out?
А что решить? Все очень...
What's there to work out? It's very simple. If you really want to stop fighting, you need to stop supplying weapons. It will be over within a few weeks. That's it. And then we can agree on some terms.
Can you imagine a scenario where you sent Russian troops to Poland?
Только в одном случае, если со стороны...
Only in one case, if Poland attacks Russia. Why? Because we have no interest in Poland, Latvia, or anywhere else. Why would we do that? We simply don't have any interest.
Well, he invaded Ukraine. He has territorial aims across the continent, and you're saying unequivocally you don't.
Это абсолютно исключено.
It is absolutely out of the question. You just don't have to be any kind of analyst. It goes against common sense to get involved in some kind of a global war.
Глобальная война.
I do not understand why American soldiers should fight in Ukraine. There are mercenaries from the United States there. The bigger number of mercenaries comes from Poland, with mercenaries from the United States in second place and mercenaries from Georgia in third place. Don't you have anything better to do? You have issues on the border, issues with migration, issues with the national debt, more than $33 trillion. You have nothing better to do, so you should fight in Ukraine? Wouldn't it be better to negotiate with Russia, make an agreement, already understanding the situation that is developing today, realizing that Russia will fight for its interests to the end?
Who blew up Nord Stream?
You for sure.
I was busy that day. Nate, do you have I did not blow up Nord Stream. Thank you, though.
У вас лично, может быть, есть алиби, у вас лично.
You personally may have an alibi, but the CIA has no such alibi.
Do you have evidence that NATO or the CIA did it?
Знаете,
You know, I won't get into details, but people always say in such cases, look for someone who is interested.
But I'm confused. I mean, that's the biggest act of industrial terrorism ever, and it's the largest emission of CO2 in history. Okay, so if you had evidence, and presumably given your security services, your intel services, you would, that NATO, the US, CIA, the West, did this, why wouldn't you present it and win a propaganda victory?
в войне пропаганды очень сложно.
In the war of propaganda, it is very difficult to defeat the United States, because the United States controls all the world's media and many European media.
How have sanctions, do you think, changed the dollar's place in the world?
Вы знаете, это одна из грубейших
You know, to use the dollar as a tool of foreign policy struggle is one of the biggest strategic mistakes made by the US political leadership. Nevertheless, it is the main weapon used by the United States to preserve its power across the world. US dollars accounted for approximately 50% of our transactions with third countries, while currently it is down to 13%. Our transactions in yuan accounted for about 3%.
Сейчас 34%.
Today, 34% of our transactions are made in rubles and about as much, a little over 34% in yuan. What are you doing? You are cutting yourself off. All experts say this.
The Vice President of the United States went to the Munich Security Conference and encouraged the President of Ukraine to join NATO. Do you think that was an effort to provoke you into military action?
All this put together led to the decision to end the war that neo-Nazis started in Ukraine in 2014.
You've described the connection between Russia and Ukraine. You've described Russia itself a couple of times as orthodox. That's central to your understanding of Russia. You've said you're orthodox. What does that mean for you? You're a Christian leader by your own description. So what effect does that have on you?
You know, as I already mentioned, in 988, Prince Vladimir himself was baptized following the example of his grandmother, Princess Olga.
Christianity is specifically a nonviolent religion. Jesus says, turn the other cheek, don't kill. How can a leader who has to kill, of any country, how can a leader be a Christian? How do you reconcile that to yourself?
Очень легко. Если речь идет о защите себя и своей семьи.
It is very easy when it comes to protecting oneself and one's family, one's homeland. We won't attack anyone.
С переворота и с начала боевых действий на Донецке.
When did the developments in Ukraine start?
Вот с чего.
Since the coup d'etat and the hostilities in Donbass began, that's when they started. And we're protecting our people, ourselves, our homeland, and our future.
Она не во внешних проявлениях, и в том, чтобы ходить
As for religion in general,
или бить головой в пол. Она в сердце.
you know, it's not about external manifestations. It's not about going to church every day or banging your head on the floor.
Человекоориентированная. И Достоевский
It is in the heart. And our culture is so human-oriented.
гений.
It took 5 centuries for the Roman Empire to fall apart.
В сегодняшней ситуации
The difference with what is happening now
процессы изменений
is that all the processes of change are happening at a much faster pace than in Roman times. I think there's no stopping Elon Musk. He will do as he sees fit. I think he's a smart person, I truly believe he is. So you need to reach an agreement with him because this process needs to be formalized and subjected to certain rules.
Evan Gershkovich, who's the Wall Street Journal reporter, he's 32, and he's been in prison for almost a year. This is a huge story in the United States, and I just want to ask you directly, without getting into the details of it or your version of what happened, if as a sign of your decency, you would be willing to release him to us and we'll bring him back to the United States.
Мы столько сделали жестов доброй воли, что, мне кажется, мы исчерпали всю линию.
We have done so many gestures of goodwill out of decency that I think we have run out of them.
Ни разу не ответил.
However, in theory, we can say that we do not rule out that we can do that
Не исключаем того, что мы можем это
if our
сделать
partners
при
take reciprocal steps.
встречном движении со
And maybe he was breaking your law in some way, but he's not a super spy, and everybody knows that, and he's being held hostage in exchange, which is true. With respect, it's true, and everyone knows it's true. So maybe he's in a different category. Maybe it's not fair to ask for, somebody else in exchange for letting him out. Maybe it degrades Russia to do that.
You can give different interpretations to what constitutes a spy. We're willing to negotiate. It is the Western side, and Ukraine is obviously a satellite state of the US. It is evident.
Ukraine was prevented from negotiating a peace settlement by the former British Prime Minister acting on behalf of the Biden administration. So of course they're a satellite. Big countries control small countries. That's not new. And that's why I asked about dealing directly with the Biden administration, which is making these decisions, not President Zelensky of Ukraine.
Но если администрация Зеленского на Украине отказалась от переговоров, я исхожу
Well,
из того, что
if the Zelensky administration in Ukraine refused to negotiate, I assume they did it under the instruction from Washington.
решение. Пусть
So I just want to make sure I'm not misunderstanding what you're saying. I don't think that I am. I think you're saying you want a negotiated settlement to what's happening in Ukraine.
правильно. Но
Right.
мы уже добились этого.
And we made it. We prepared a huge document in Istanbul that was initialed by the head of the Ukrainian delegation. He affixed his signature to some of the provisions, not to all of it. He put his signature and then he himself said, we were ready to sign it and the war would have been over long ago, 18 months ago. However, Prime Minister Johnson came, talked us out of it, and we missed that chance. Well, you missed it, you made a mistake, let them get back to that, that is all. Let us go back to 1991, when we were promised that NATO would not expand, to 2008, when the doors to NATO opened to the declaration of state sovereignty of Ukraine, declaring Ukraine a neutral state. Let us go back to the fact that NATO and US military bases started to appear on the territory of Ukraine, creating threats to us. Let us go back to coup d'etat in Ukraine in 2014. It is pointless though, isn't it? What is happening is, to a certain extent, an element of a civil war. Everyone in the West thinks that the Russian people have been split by hostilities forever. No, they will be reunited. The unity is still there.